Hey, before I kick off the podcast, I just want to shout out Next Door Clothing. Next Door, a clothing brand based out of Bondi in Sydney. They're making really nice jeans and shirts and hats. So go and check out their full range at nextdoorsydney.com. They're also artists, so you can go and check out a range of art. They put on rad parties, and I love what they're doing. So nextdoorsydney.com for the full range. I'd like to start off with some shout-outs. I'd like to shout out to Indosol for their Getting the Food to the People Who Need It initiative in Bali. They're also supporting organic food farms and supplying families in Bali who are really struggling. And for every pair of flip-flops or sandals sold, they are supplying 5 meals to families in Bali. So get onto their website, indosol.com, use the promo code THT. You'll get a 15% discount, and you'll also be buying food for the people that need it. Also, I'd like to shout out Project Nazi. Go to their Project Nazi GoFundMe page. They are literally providing the essentials to Balinese people on the streets, providing them with food and essential items to support their family. So just for a bit of context, $2 can feed a family of 4 per day. So just think about that, and every little bit counts. So please go to the Project Nazi at GoFundMe, and shout out to Sam Mahoney for organising that. All right, here we go.
I'm having a good time.
You are?
Yeah.
I can tell.
And we are rolling.
Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Terrible Happy Talks. Today's guest is Gordon Bradbery. Gordon is a husband, father, ordained church minister, and now the current Lord Mayor of Wollongong City on the southeast coast of Australia. Born and raised in a rural town in the state of New South Wales as a child, Gordon moved to the capital city of Sydney at 10 years of age and spent the majority of his teenage years living in a children's home, a time he personally refers to as being raised by the School of Hard Knocks. Gordon's service to the community is vast and sustained. Throughout his adult life, he has consistently advocated for, led and initiated support programs linked to mental health, aged care, homelessness and beyond. Aside from his many other accolades and awards, in more recent years, Gordon was made a member of the Order of Australia for his significant service to local community. Gordon is very much a champion of the people in my eyes, an advocate for community cohesion, connection, harmony and inclusivity. During his long tenure as a church minister, he literally conducted hundreds of marriage ceremonies, and mine was included in that. I was immediately intrigued by his passion, sense of humour and willingness to conduct wedding ceremonies outside the 4 walls of a church. His whole approach seemed contrary to the dogma I had often associated with a traditional church setting, and I liked it, as do many others. Today, Gordon is with me to share his journey, challenges, experiences, and hopes for the future. Lord Mayor Gordon Bradbery, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And we were just talking at the start, and I really don't believe in coincidence anymore. And when our paths crossed, I just felt really right to have you on the show, especially just given the climate of the world at the moment. I think a lot of people are feeling very uneasy, and there's a lot of disharmony. And in the time that I've been witnessing you from afar in this town, I've always really admired your ability to bring communities together. And so I'm just really, really glad to have you. So thanks for your time.
Well, thanks. Synchronicity there. Yeah.
You think there's some synchronicity?
Yes, or something. Anyway, but there was this guy sitting in the mall with his little daughter, and I was strolling by, and one thing led to another, and here we are.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Do you believe in synchronicity?
Well, there is something going on. As I often think to myself, how did I get to nearly 70? Well, actually, I turned 69 just recently, and I'm thinking, not far off 70 now, and how did I get here? You know, I can remember saying to my grandfather when I was very little, "How old are you, Pop?" And he said something like, "Oh, I'm 60." And I thought, wow, that's old.
It must seem like it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And as much that as everyone who gets to my age probably says, I don't know whatever happened all that time, you know. Anyway, Here we are.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I wanted to just sort of ask you, call me a bit of an amateur here, but can you give us what's a day in the life of the Lord Mayor like? What does it look like for us average Joes out here?
Well, pre-COVID would have been around about 7 or 6:30, 7 o'clock. It's usually the media following up on a story or an issue and thus wanting a comment. Then, usually I do my morning weights and exercise and rush out the door around about 9 to get in here for the first meetings, which usually kick off around about 9:30. Off we go for a series of meetings, and then there might be a series of community events or engagements, and that can go right through until late in the evening. It doesn't always happen like that, but it's one of those interesting jobs in as much that when you're involved in the community, meet so many interesting people. I get a great deal of enjoyment out of it. Yes, I should be retired, but this is like my hobby, just an opportunity to get out there and see and experience perspectives. And there are times when you think you've got it all sewn up and then somebody else will come with another perspective on some issue or some different approach to a problem, and you think, oh, wow, that's human creativity for you. It's a bit like water on a flat roof. If there's a crack in it somewhere, the water will find a way through. And the human creativity and the application of the human mind in seeing things from various perspectives is a really interesting buzz. Mm.
Do you think that's just completely integral to effective leadership?
Well, I think for a start, leadership is about empathy and trying to understand the other person's perspective. So I was listening to somebody the other day who said, yes, empathy is like going a mile in another person's shoes, but you can also look at it, you can be a mile away from them and own their shoes at the same time. But anyway, look, it is understanding perspectives, at times ruling the line and saying, yes, I've heard all the arguments for and against, and then just ruling the line and say I need to make a stance or make a decision and stick by it, and then proceed. And lead by example, but also realising that you don't know everything. For instance, when I'm on an aircraft, I am not the pilot, and I concede to those with better skills and a greater understanding of the way everything works. In this particular task, I have certain skills that I bring to this role, but I also have a general manager of the organisation who's in charge of the operational side, and respecting the skill sets within the organisation to advise and giving encouragement to those with the appropriate skills and talents and abilities to come to the fore in the interests of the greater organisation or the community in our case.
Shedding the ego and being humble enough to admit your weaknesses?
Of course. And part of that, it's not so much, and it's not always just recognising your weaknesses, but just recognise that there are other people with skills and abilities that you can mobilise, and that's my task, mobilise in the interests of solving the problem in the better for the betterment of the city.
Yeah, interesting. It's I'm really intrigued by your humble beginnings. When I was doing a little bit of research and learning a little bit more about your early days, if we go back there and then we fast forward to where you are now, how do you feel about actually being called the Lord Mayor? How does that sit with you when you're referred to as Lord Mayor? From the young boy in Tamworth, New South Wales, to now, how does it sit with you personally? Does it sit well with you?
There's an old saying, one day you might be a feather duster, you might be a rooster one day and feather duster the next. Look, I'm very conscious of the fact that it's a title. It is a title that was given to the city, not to me. Mm-hmm. I wear it for the moment. It was bestowed upon the city as an honorific by Queen Elizabeth II around about 50 years ago. Mm. And And so you're elected to this particular position. Don't let it go to your head. It's not meant to be. It's only a title. What goes to my head is the satisfaction of seeing things happen in the city in the interests of its people and trying to work our way through sharing around a very limited amount of resources to meet a huge number of issues and problems and infrastructure and service needs that are required for the benefit of our residents. So, when it comes to the kid from Tamworth and all that sort of stuff, I lived in pretty poor circumstances. And I, surprisingly enough, never aspired to own a lot, because also one of the other things about being a minister of religion, I might have conducted lots of weddings, but I've also conducted a lot of funerals. And I know, as the old saying goes, there are no pockets in a shroud, and as much as you can't take it with you. And I've seen people accumulate a lot of wealth, and I think to myself, yes, live comfortably, but also don't do it at the expense of others, and also at the same time don't miss out on other opportunities in life as well, while concentrating on just achieving a large bank balance.
Wow, that's funny you said that, because that's actually been a recurring theme in this podcast. This notion of, does money buy happiness, and how much are we sacrificing for that chasing of the carrot? Are we losing our relationships? Are relationships breaking down because of that? And money potentially, I think, if you work hard or are smart with money and focus on it, it could be potentially infinite. You could have more money than you can spend in 10 lifetimes. But time is finite. And, when I see people working extended hours in jobs and stressing themselves silly and not spending times with their family, I kind of can't help thinking that is that some of the breakdowns we're having in society because the family structure is being eroded?
Well, I don't know that might be one of the outcomes, the breakdown of family structures and so on. But what I'm very conscious of the fact is that one individual accumulating so many resources at the expense of others, and we've got a finite planet where we've got billions of people and growing at an exponential rate. It is out of control. And at the same time, the problem, say, in America at the present and in other locations around the world, is the unfair and inequitable distribution of resources. And so I'm very mindful of the fact that, yes, everyone deserves to live comfortably and have the opportunity to pursue happiness and a sense of fulfillment, but at the same time not at the expense of the environment, to the level. I've just looked back now, perhaps the happiest times of my life have been in circumstances which were a lot more simple. And I think we can all testify to that in some respects. So it doesn't, complexity is not a means of finding happiness. And I was only thinking of this in relation to the fact that today I missed out on 2 meetings because Zoom and the internet went down and things like that. And I'm thinking to myself, how dependent we are on technology and all these things, and the sense of frustration because the latest convenience isn't working quite the way I expected. We've got ourselves got our knickers in a knot over things that I think at times are very questionable. But for me, the alienation from nature. One of the advantages of living in Australia, as far as I was concerned, was I was raised in this country and grew up in the post-World War II era, born 1951, lived through some wonderful times when the population of this country was very small and limited, and so were the resources. And I had the opportunity to get up at the crack of dawn and you'd go wandering around the bush and for miles and play by the river and the creek and so on. Nowadays, it's so sterile and limiting, and kids don't have the chance to wander.
Are we overregulated?
Well, that's what happens when you live in a highly urbanised society like ours. You know, Australia, even though it is a big country, most of the population lives around the coastal fringe, especially around the east, southeast, and the southwest of Western Australia. So, yeah, it's just the way it is at the present in the complex urbanised society in which we are participating, and regulated, highly regulated, for the very reason that we're, I think, from my perspective anyway, we're very litigious. You know, we don't take responsibility for our lives as much as we used to. We outsource our responsibility as we do our memory when we use Google. We outsource so many of our basic human activities to others, and I think one of those things that we outsource is personal responsibility at times. That's not to say we don't care, but we're deferring to governments for our happiness all the time. And then we defer to the massive psychological industry that's out there established now to help us find our way. So, for instance, the number of psych graduates that are coming out of the university need to be employed. So we're all suddenly got psychological problems and illnesses and so on. And we talk about, you know, we're not adjusting to this society. Well, I don't think it's us that's the problem so much as the society we're asked to adjust to. No wonder we've got mental health problems and suicide rates are high.
Well, yeah, we're trying to adjust in some ways, being forced to live in a way that we're maybe not meant to. And you were talking about the psych graduates. I mean, isn't that supply and demand in response to what is literally a pandemic of mental illness across the world, or mental health?
Well, it is, because I don't think we're meant to live in this with such numbers. You know, I'll be very candid with you. I've been to China a couple of times and you know, travelled extensively in my life, and I've had that good fortune. But I hate going to those locations where you cannot find the horizon, you cannot get your bearings with natural features. One of the most pleasing places I've been to is Africa, simply because it felt like Australia. Right. You know, distances and things like that. Whereas I built form and the congestion of Europe and America and China. And, you know, I remember my first trip overseas was to Japan in the mid-70s. I went there on a sort of an exchange study thing. And no reflection on the Japanese society. They were very kind and generous to me. But I nearly went crazy, because here's a person who was used to you know, the open countryside. I came from Camden at the time, living there. Camden's near us here, and then it was a rural town. And then I went to Tokyo, and I nearly went crazy. I nearly fell down worshipping a sign in English, because it was about the only thing I could recognise.
I found Tokyo so difficult to navigate. There was very few English sign alternatives in the public transport when I was there. Yeah, it was challenging, but amazing, but challenging.
So that's one of the reasons why I like Wollongong, in as much that it's a long, narrow coastal strip of urban development, and on one side you got what's known as the Illawarra Escarpment, and so that is the green strip, and then on the eastern side you got the Pacific Ocean, so you get your bearings very easily.
Geographically, it's got to be one of the best places on earth. It's absolutely stunning, especially after living abroad for a few years and then coming back. I think that's when it really sinks in at how beautiful the natural landscape is. It's like no other, like with the mountains and the sea so close together. It's pretty special. Yeah. So if you had to reflect upon your early years, your childhood in rural New South Wales, like do you reflect on them with fond memories? Like what were your early days like growing up? Was it fun times, hard times?
Well, it varied in as much as there were some beautiful, wonderful times that I look back on in terms of being a kid that wandered around a lot. We lived in town, but we also had access to our own chickens and vegetable garden and things of that nature when all went well. But I had two parents who married very young. Then after the fourth child was born, I was the eldest, but my youngest brother came and for this couple who had poor skills, and in circumstances where they just weren't able to manage, and then had access to a few more resources, because my mother was a hairdresser at the time and my father was a greenkeeper, and very, very good at it. But so they had a reasonable amount of income, but they couldn't somehow manage it, and they both dissolved into alcoholism and the disintegration of the family. So there's some pretty sad times there as well. And then, then they of course they came apart as a couple. My three brothers and myself were in my mother's custody. She wasn't able to look after us. Thus, I ended up in Sydney in a children's home and all the rest. There were beautiful moments and good moments, but there was also brutal and horrible moments, domestic violence, and my mother so distraught and broken down in terms of her mental health, slashed her wrists in front of me, and my brothers and I were, it's interesting because I have more empathy for my brothers who experienced that than understanding it for myself. But I was always the eldest and took responsibility, so I can remember holding my mother's wrists while I sent my brothers to call the ambulance. That sort of thing,
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, well, that's called life. It's reality. It's just the experience of...
Do you mind if I ask, how has that trauma presented itself in your later years?
Well, it probably means that I am a person who's relatively underneath it all conservative. I just want things to remain pretty normal and even, not as adventurous as I should be.
And we're back. We just had a short break there. Gordon had a media press conference to go to, which just sounds really sounds kind of cool to me. Like, yeah, I'm sorry, I just got to go talk to the media. I'll be back. Like, it's a little bit rock star.
Oh, really? I wish it paid more. No. No, look, it's just part of the course as far as I'm concerned. So,
do you feel like a rock star when you go downstairs and you've got like a camera and a reporter waiting for you? It must be pretty cool.
Oh, no, it's just it was an issue about that I had to deal with on this particular occasion. They wanted a perspective on it, and council made a decision to close a couple of facilities this coming weekend, and I had to say that it was because of COVID and the possibility there'd be large numbers gathering, and that was the only way we could comply with what are known as the public health orders at the present time. So I've basically got to represent the council's position and try and articulate it in the best way I can. Yeah, that's the deal.
You articulate well.
Oh,
lucky.
As long as I'm briefed well, I can be a good parrot.
Yeah, I don't want to go down the COVID-19 rabbit hole. I really don't. But I'm a little bit curious. How much pressure is that putting on you as a leader at the moment?
Well, by example, I also have to comply with the requirements set by the state government in this respect, and council has to as well, because we're basically servants of the state government. So that means that we have to put restrictions on people having access to our parks and facilities, and not only shutting them down was one thing, but now lifting the restrictions and doing so in a responsible way and a very even sort of way, and trying to make it as equitable and fair as possible. That's the big challenge for the council at present.
Keeping that, like you said, keeping it equitable and keeping it fair. I mean, I see a lot of people struggling financially during this situation, and businesses really struggling with it. And I'm sure that would weigh heavy on everyone's conscience at the top levels.
Yes, well, council also has to take into consideration there are people who can't pay their rates, and we had to put in mechanisms by which that can be deferred, and then waiving certain fees. We've got about 70 properties that we lease, and as major landlords, we've got to be very conscious of the impact on those who are our lessees and businesses that can't sustain while this is occurring, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
In those meetings, in those chamber meetings, are they? Is there general compassion from the other councillors?
Oh, very
is that
much so.
Is that the overriding theme of compassion?
Well, yeah, I think the motive is there all the time. I'm very proud of my council, even though it's politically divided, it's all over the place, but they usually work very well and head towards consensus. I think one of the most interesting times was when the Royal Caribbean ship Ruby Princess was anchored in Port Kembla Harbour. There were citizens who were saying, they've allowed a ship full of people or staff or crew, I should say, who were likely to be infected with the COVID virus to land in our city. Now, they were in quarantine, they couldn't leave the ship, and there were strict biosecurity issues around it, and it was kept and anchored well away from the city. Now, there were a lot of people who said that we were being dumped on, but the majority of the people, including some of my councillors, said we should be compassionate. And it was really wonderful to see the city respond to those people who were on that ship, the crew members who were well away from home, well away from loved ones. And so there were care packages assembled and they were sent to the ship and all those sorts of things. And so there was a motion acknowledging that it's great to welcome them in good times, and we should also welcome them in the sad and challenging times like at present. The ship left with a massive banner on the back of the ship, said "Thank you, Illawarra," acknowledging our region's contribution. And I thought that said it all.
I think it's great that they've used that as an opportunity, as an opportunity to show compassion. And I really like this saying, like, with change comes opportunity. And I just really, it resonates with me because I think there is at the moment, given the restrictions that are placed on a lot of the restrictions that have been in place, I think there's a lot of really good opportunities coming out of it. For me, on a personal level, those opportunities have been connecting with my daughter on a deeper level because I've literally been forced to stay home with her. But what do you think are some positives that are coming out or will come out of this situation?
Well, for a start, I think it might teach people that they're more resilient than what they realised and come back and discover their own inner resources and strength. It's been, and for some, really terrifying and challenging. It also illustrates to us all that we are still vulnerable, that we who live in Western countries think that we're got institutions and structures around us that makes us safe and so on. We are still vulnerable. We are still interdependent. We still need to rely on each other's values of compassion, discipline. You know, this has been one where we've been asked to be restrained in what we did or where we went, how we behaved, personal hygiene, social distancing, all those sorts of things. And so it's also, I think, illustrated for a lot of people what the environment could look like if it was cleaner. So
Yes.
As I understand it, I've been to India a couple of times and they were able to see the Himalayas and from great distances from the mountains, which you could never experience normally. I've been in Delhi and it's New Delhi, and it's been horrible because of the air pollution, and likewise in Beijing and other parts of the world. So the fact is that we put the brakes on, and I'm just only hoping that somehow or other this might also mean that there's going to be more pressure towards a more sustainable environmental and response to the environment.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping too. I definitely
might be giving us a chance to reset the defaults.
Thank you. I love that. The big reset, the big pause, time to think.
Yeah,
I think, and I really hope like companies do start to reevaluate some of their processes. I mean, that's why I really like being affiliated with Indosol, because they've been looking at solutions. Like they've taken 100,000 motor vehicle tyres out of landfill and turned them into like flip-flops and sandals. And I just think that's a really good example of like, okay, are we really thinking outside the square with how we're doing things? Are we being as resourceful as we could be? But
could I just say that's another example of where tyres are pulverized, and we use that for soft fall, what we call soft fall in playgrounds and
it's
that
great.
sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, the safety ground for kids.
And also mixing it with bitumen and also using it in other services as well.
Well, yeah, that whole notion of a secondary resource market.
Oh, the circular economy.
Circular
as
economy.
we call it, yeah.
Are you an advocate for that?
Oh, yes, we are. And the council has positioned itself by 2050 to be carbon neutral in this city and trying to even wander back even further. So Wollongong City Council has did an audit of our emissions that we're responsible for as a council. We found actually that our biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions was methane gas that was emitted from our rubbish tips.
Yes, I believe that.
And
but not the industry here.
Oh, well, we don't have much control over the industry. That comes under state EPA responsibilities.
That's different. Okay.
But we had to look at what we as a council did in terms of mitigating our greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
And so we're really working hard now to wind that back considerably in terms of looking at pulling out garden waste, food waste and all those sorts of things, putrescible waste which breaks down producing methane.
It becomes septic.
And so when it's in landfill, it breaks down, forms and ultimately forms methane, which then contributes to the greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, for me that one's an easy one because I mean, if people just put their food scraps into a compost bin in their backyard and then put it back into the garden, just throw it into the garden, as opposed to it being buried underground.
Or as we plan to do, we've got everyone's got a green bin. The green bin means that you can at least put your garden waste in there, and that goes into a composting system, which then can be redistributed. And we're now moving into the next phase of you doing food organics, as we call
food
them.
Organics.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's so cool. Yeah, I love that. But with the COVID-19 stuff, I personally, one fear there's a lot of good I think that can come out of it and I think will come out of it and has come out of it. I personally get a little bit nervous about the restrictions that have been put in place, which I understand that leadership and governments have a responsibility to keep people safe. I get that. I guess one thing that concerns me is once there's a level of comfort that enforcers have with enforcing these restrictions, and that it could be something that could be defaulted to again readily, and it could be possibly like an erosion of civil liberties over time. Yes. That worries me personally, and that's just I don't know. Do you think I'm okay to think like that?
Well, I think it worried me as well because the COVID situation was one that I thought suspiciously of because I also look at the number of people that die of flu every year. So I'm very mindful of that. And in our health system, every July, August, we have a proportion of our elderly community die dramatically, and or bigger numbers, I should say, because of flu outbreaks. So I did look at it skeptically, but the point is that it's likely or was likely to overwhelm the health system. And I think we made the decision that we didn't want to get into a position where we had to determine who got the resources to live or to die. And I think that is probably one of the main reasons why there was this big effort to really restrict the COVID situation. And look at the number of deaths in UK, Italy. Look at what's happening in Brazil at the present. So did we want to go there? The United States is obviously working on the notion of herd immunity to some extent. And that highlights a really significant tension in the world at present. The rights of the individual vis-a-vis the rights of the community or the interests of the community. It's always going to be a tension. It's one of the tensions of modern society. Since the invention of the individual, and highlighted by the philosophers of the 19th century, who emphasised the rights of the individual, which came by and back even to the formation of the American Constitution and those sorts of Montesquieu, Rousseau, and those sort of thinkers that influenced and shaped the French Revolution and the thinking behind the American Revolution, the rights of the individual.
Yeah, and do you feel that that's where empathy is so important and that we need to be promoting empathy as a solution? Because people will always differ in their views and perspectives. And I feel personally that nurturing empathy is a way to be free, but then also respect others. And my question to you, I guess, is like, how do we nurture empathy?
I think for a start, empathy can be nurtured when people's basic needs are satisfied so that they have the ability to think beyond themselves. When a person is drowning at the bottom of the swimming pool, they're not thinking of God, okay, and the future of the universe, or, sorry, they might be thinking of God because they're saying, shit, I'm going to die. But excuse me for putting it in those terms, but what I am mindful of is that if you want to elevate the human condition to be empathetic and compassionate and so on, either we're all in the same boat together, at the same level, which is the thing that never ceases to amaze me in certain very poor communities where empathy and generosity can be still exercised simply because they're all at the same level. But where you have a society where people are at various levels of opportunity, accessing the resources, healthcare, food, education, and so on, that's all over the place. Then you have this comparison stuff going on. And then you then start highlighting the individual, the rights of the individual. And then empathy becomes, and compassion becomes, a discretionary spend. And I think I'd like it to be a bit more intentional. So you can either mandate it or force it by become a socialist type of country, and make sure that you trim a bit off the top to give to those on the bottom, and lift it up and so on, and work that way. America, for instance, classic example of a country with great extremes, but also has the incredible amount of benevolence as well. Philanthropy in the United States is really an outstanding feature as well, but it is discretionary. And that's where it's gone wrong, because it hasn't also been focused upon areas which I think are areas of greatest need, such as elevating the disenfranchised. When
you say a discretionary spend, are you referring to links to gender? Oh, not gender, sorry, agenda and bias?
Yeah. Well, it's that people in philanthropy in the United States use it to immortalize people, and so they build a library or leave a bequest and so on. There are lots of good benevolent people in America and in Australia and all around the world. But governments, their task is to make sure that those on the bottom of the pile also have access to resources and opportunities as well. Whereas discretionary philanthropy and so on, by its very nature, is by my choice, not necessarily guided. There are some who actually give funds to foundations where they utilise a different approach, and that is on needs basis. So they don't put any attachments to it, any restrictions, and just hand over funds. There are certain organisations in Australia which you appeal to on the basis of the case that you put up, and have access to funds that way. And I reckon that's, from my perspective anyway, should be the way that philanthropy is handled. But in a society that respects choice, freedom of choice, then that's you've just got to go with the flow.
I'm listening to what you're saying, and I agree with so much of it. And I often get weighed down in the complexities of the world. It's just the way my mind works, and you can go deep. You can go really deep. And I'm for me at the moment, considering like the heightened state of emotion in the world at the moment for various reasons, I'm trying to think of ways to simplify my thinking and how I'm going to approach changes that I'd like to see in the world. So, in your opinion, what can an individual do to initiate change? What are some qualities of a change maker?
Well, it's very interesting in the postmodern environment, actually, because the postmodern environment's actually undermined the notion of the hero or the leader. There's always probing questions which then bring them into disrepute or bring them down and so on. So everyone is vulnerable to what we call the tall poppy syndrome. You can be have your knees cut out, your legs cut out from underneath you. But I just think, the best skill that you've got is to put a line around the all the noise, somewhat shield it, and just say, this is the way I will live my life. And in the that's not to say that you practice denial, but I think at some stage or another, yes, listen to as much of the argument as possible, but then come back and say, well, I've listened to as much as I can cope with. I will now try and live my life in a way that uses the critique of the environment. Am I living in as close to a natural way as possible, which is respecting the fact that I am part of this creation and live respectfully within it? You need a number of sort of reference points, and I think the environment is one, fairness to others, living equitably, with a sense of justice. Do I need all this stuff? Do I spend a lot of my time maintaining stuff?
Yeah.
Or what about other priorities?
Yeah. I agree. For me, I'm really working on staying aware and maintaining a consciousness and making conscious decisions in line with my values. I know for many they use their religion or their belief systems as a guide for that.
Well, for me, that is as a Christian, I still have referred to the example of Jesus and his understanding of God. And we talk about Jesus being the Son of God. Well, we're just basically saying that there was a unique and special relationship between the Creator and Jesus
and the mortal,
and his understanding. Yes, his immortality, he came in contact with that as well. If I could just digress a bit, I just think the Gospels are nothing more than eulogies for a person who is deeply loved and moved a group of people to such an extent that they could not let him die.
You're the first person that's ever described it to me like that.
Well, they are eulogies because they were written after his death. They were written with reflections. They're not historical documents, and they never were meant to be historical documents. They were meant to give a synopsis of his life as best they understood, and most of his life, in terms of his public life, was probably 3 years between the age of 30 and 33. So when it came around to writing the story, Mark gives focuses mostly on those 3 years. Matthew and Luke push the boundaries out further and give us his birth or origin stories, such as the Bethlehem stuff and even the genealogies of those two Gospels. Matthew and Luke differ.
Gotcha.
So Matthew traces him back to Abraham, and Luke to Adam. So the idea is that they expanded the story. What I believe happened was there was this unique individual with a consciousness and awareness of things that we would describe as divine, in a nutshell, but I could unpack that. That'll take hours. But what happened was a group of people who were so enmeshed in what he taught and moved by this individual, they followed him to the extent that they were prepared to die. Now, but so was he.
And would you say they were prepared to die because they had the realization that there was a spirit greater than them? There was something that was immortal, they started to see something beyond this world?
Yes, that too. He spoke of those things, but he also spoke of things that endured. They want to immerse themselves in the values and the being of this Jesus, who saw life as in terms of wasn't just by the food, or the man does not live by bread alone, but by the very word of God, that sort of stuff. And so you had individuals who touched bases with the eternal. And when you do that as an individual, you can lose yourself in the interest of something bigger. Now, that could be a negative too, because you talk to a person from ISIL or certain fanatics in other movements and so on, they would say the same. But Christians also, Christians act within the framework of what is love. Love in the Christian sense is intentionally seeking the well-being of another.
Interesting.
So it's not emotion, but in acting in a way that intentionally seeks the well-being of another other than yourself. And to love the Lord your God.
Selflessness.
But loving the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And loving and also have that same love for yourself.
Now, what do you think? Is that why you think interfaith dialogue is really important? So conversing with people who align themselves with other denominations, do you think that is important? So that underlying theme that you just mentioned of acknowledging the well-being of others, which is effectively saying getting out of yourself, being of service to others, caring for others. Is that right? Well, other denominations have those same, at their core, have that as well.
Yeah, well, they all,
And the point I'm trying to get to, though, is by having interfaith conversations with other communities and movements, or do you think that is could be really integral in strengthening communities?
Personally, my approach is this. I might not have been a Christian if I hadn't been born in Australia. Exactly. If I'd been born in India, might have been a Hindu. There is an essential theme. You've got to go back a bit and understand the role of religion. Religion is like throwing a blanket of meaning over the universe. Okay, so to give you an explanation of why we're here, what it's all about, so on. So there are groups who use religion as a means of controlling others. So that's where your ethical stuff comes in, your value systems and so on. I'm a more transcendental type of person, in as much that I've always seen religion as an opportunity to explore the sense of transcendence. Now, that's why you have confusion and difficulties and conflict in religion, is because there are some people who say Allah said this, or Yahweh
exactly.
said this, or the Christians will say God said this, and so on. And you will behave in this way, and so on, so on, so on. Jesus had a more open perspective, and that is that everything should be pushed through a filter which he called love. Love, and that is intentionally seeking the well-being of another and the best for God. To love God is intentionally seeking the best for God, to be in a relationship with humanity. Now, whatever that God may be or God is, okay, the old guy in the sky with the big beard and a set of lightning bolts to zap us if we step out of line. That sort of stuff is just redundant nonsense. But what we need to come to understand is that for some people, religion means many things. So, as I said, for me, it's more about transcendence. Whereas for others, in other traditions, it means throwing a blanket of order about human behaviour.
Structure.
Structure, sex. Sex is a big one, procreation, the meaning of life, so on, so on, so on. Family, tribe, loyalty, so all those things that actually facilitate political stuff. That's why often politicians will utilise religion, and religion and gets political. It's because it's a means of controlling people as well, and I'm not into that.
Gotcha.
Okay, and it's really important to differentiate that sort of stuff. And then there are those who exploit it on an emotional level to really play on people's weaknesses and inadequacies and so on. So you get the exploitative religion. And that is another evil as far as I'm concerned. But I'm a more expansive sort of person. My religious experience has been one to connect with, through Jesus, the opportunity to see the life in its context. I think the absolute arrogance of human beings is where we're sitting on this pinpoint of dust called Earth, and we think we know it all. And mind you, it's not. It's a beautiful planet, I must admit. But one of the best things in life, as far as I'm concerned, is to go to a place where you experience age and time so vast that it puts you back in your place and you feel like you're a speck of dust. And that's often reflected in some of the great thinkers of the Bible as well. One of the most powerful places for me was Olduvai Gorge in Africa, Tanzania, was where some of the first hominids emerged, and the early forms of human form or near human form. The sense of age, that place, or Kakadu in the Northern Territory. You go out there and look at the rock art of the Aboriginals that goes back tens of thousands of years.
Amazing.
One of the greatest experiences in life is to put you back in your place. And it reminds you, takes away your ego, and you just know you're nothing in relation to this huge expanse of time and space, and have that experience in some of the oldest places on earth, let alone when you gaze at the sky on the top of the Andes, as I've done.
Have you?
And, and just looked at the universe and through telescopes and so on, and just been aware we are nothing. Yeah. And one of my great quotes, one of the things that I really love.
Yes, we are nothing.
Yeah, well, not in a negative sense, but we're part
I get
of
it.
something.
I know what you're saying, yeah.
And I was often said when human beings and the earth is made of stardust, but there's a beautiful line in Alexander Pope's poem, an essay on man, like bubbles on the sea of matter born. We rise, we break, and to that sea return.
That's awesome.
And I think for me, that is what it's about. My moment is like a bubble. I'm just a bubble on the sea of matter born. I rise, I break, and to that sea return. I just return to what I am. From
you go back to it. You go back to it. I think us humans forget that we are actually part of the environment. We are not separate to the environment.
We're made by it. We're created by it. We're thrust up by it. Yeah.
I feel like we've forgotten. But going with religion for me, with my journey with it, it took me many, many years before I realised that you could actually have a sense of spirituality without actually aligning yourself with a particular religious denomination. I struggled with that for years because I had experimented with, various types of religious practices, and I seem to continuously feel repelled by some of the dogma associated with it and the practices. And it hasn't been till recent years that I feel like now I have a higher power of my own understanding, and I do pray to my higher power, And I do, in a lot of ways, align and cherry pick from religious literature that speaks to me, and when I need to, and the answers seem to come when I do that. And that's actually started since, growing up in a Christian culture predominantly, being Australian, and then living in Bali where it's a very strong Hindu culture, and to see their daily practices, but also their sheer sense of spirituality in all that they do. They work on karma, so they are constantly wanting and have this desire for others to be happy and place the needs of others before their own. And I genuinely feel, despite abject poverty and hardship, there's this happiness that just beams out of them innately, and it's intoxicating. And just as a story for you.
Yeah, well, that's a good example of where the positives of religion. I always used organised religion as my sense of reference point. And I use it also as a means of discipline, because if I'm not going to agree with it, then I have to argue it well. Okay, so I'm not just going to dismiss it and say it's this or that and it's irrelevant. I try to understand how it came about. For instance, it was only up until recent times, for instance, that the model of the universe was based on Genesis, and the formation of creation that God created in 7 days and did all that sort of stuff, and the Garden of Eden and all that, and that dominated people's thoughts and understanding of things for centuries. It's only in the last couple of 100 years that's been dismantled with plate tectonics and evolution and all the modern theories and scientific discoveries. But I also want to know why they thought that way, out of respect for people who also kept alive the spirit or the teachings of Jesus. So I wouldn't have the teachings of Jesus except for that group of people who still also ascribed, I should say, to that other stuff. So, I do so respectfully, but I also realise that they were innovators in their time, and so when they did their thing, that was new. So I have to do my thing in my time, which is new, reacting to what was, but do it in a way that is respectful and with discipline.
Respectful and with discipline.
Anyway.
On a personal level, when you're faced with a difficult decision or a moral dilemma, would you mind sharing the strategies that you put in place? Because I feel like that would be powerful for people to hear. We are all faced with big decisions, moral dilemmas, challenges on a day-to-day basis. And when you are in those situations and you are unsure about what to do, what do you do?
Well, there are several ways in which you can look at that. You could use something like Kant's categorical imperative. That is that, as Kant said, if that decision that you made became universal and everyone did it, what would be the consequences of it?
So that's a pragmatic way to look at it. Okay. How do you do it from in regards to your faith?
Well, yeah. I'll give you a good example. There was a brothel proposed near in a certain section of the city, and we had to there were lots of people objecting to it. And I just come out and say, well, I'm a Christian, I'm against brothels. Yes, of course but there's a deeper understanding there. I'm against people having to get to the extent of using their bodies in that manner to survive. Okay, that says something about our society. So, I can say and could have said I'm against it, but I'm very conscious of the fact that it would also mean that there'd be people who'd still practice it, but they do so in pretty unhygienic and unsafe circumstances. but at the same time make sure that it's away from circumstances where it could impact upon the well-being of others.
So it's so nice to hear you've got a harm minimisation mindset. I'm sorry, that's what just does my head in, because when you realistically, those practices are going to occur regardless of you approve that application or not. And it's just such a more logical approach to go, okay, we know it's going to happen. How can we address this and keep people safe? Is that what you're saying?
And there are many who'd say, "Oh, you just given tacit support to prostitution." Well,
I feel like that's holding us back in regards to progression a lot. I mean, in Holland, for example, they have that approach to prostitution and cannabis laws, where they've accepted that they've tried to put these rigid bans on those practices because it could be a degradation of moral code in society. Or they can go, okay, well, we've tried that for many, many, many years, and it's the knock-on effect is more of a black market and unsafe practices, and the impact becomes bigger on society in various ways. Leads to drug and substance abuse. However, they actually made it legal, and businesses were able to register, and the workers were able to register their bodies as a small business. They were able to get top healthcare support. There was no, I guess, what they would call managers of these places, and reduced a black market basically. And
well,
I don't know. It's a whole other debate,
yes,
but that mindset of I don't know. It's refreshing to hear.
Well, you've got, I have to take the needs of the community into consideration, and it's all right for me who's got resources and relatively well off. I'm not a millionaire, but what I am saying is, my circumstances mean I'm comfortable. But what about the woman that is trying to survive and so on? And the other thing that's the converse of that is also that the exploitation of women.
Yes.
And so I will fight tooth and nail to make sure that women, in the interests of women, to have access to education and opportunities,
and possibly regulate it.
And I'm well known in the city for my stance for supporting women's causes. Absolutely. For that very reason.
Yeah.
Now, it isn't a black and white world in which I live and it can operate, so I have to at times look at all sides of the argument and try to find a solution which is the best solution, but I will always err on the side of the underprivileged or the downtrodden or those who are being marginalised.
I love that. That's awesome.
Oh, well, that's just...
I love it.
That's what Christianity is. Jesus didn't come into the world and teach and proclaim salvation to those who already thought that they were saved. It was those who were downtrodden, marginalised, and so on. And that meant those who were spiritually marginalised as well as those who are, whether in the physical sense or the social sense or spiritual sense. Yeah.
I heard a really good quote once. It was, the true measure of a society's culture is by how it supports its most vulnerable. And I like it. And that sort of goes in line with what you were just saying, which is, listen, I mean, it's been epic. You've had a little break and we've gone well over almost into an hour and a half.
Oh, there you go.
Of discussion.
When
I mean,
a good time.
And it's and this is when I know that we've had a meaningful conversation, because I can basically throw all my questions out the window, because I love what you said, but before we do start to head towards the end of it, I just feel this innate sense of purpose in asking you, before you had to sort of go to your press conference, we touched on a fairly heavy time in your life, and we didn't actually get to finish talking about it. And I just feel that it would be remiss of me to leave it where we left it. So I was actually, we were going back to your early days and your childhood, and you had a very traumatic situation with your mother. And my question to you was, because I just feel like this is really important, my question to you was, that trauma of your early days with that traumatic situation, how do you feel that trauma has possibly impacted on you in your adulthood, and or how have you dealt with that trauma? I guess is what I'm trying to get to.
Yes, well,
Or have you dealt with it?
Well, that's the problem, you see. And one of the big problems of psychology and psychiatry at present is where's that baseline that says you're normal? Okay, people who are traumatized can do two things. They can, sort of be made feel that they've been traumatized and they're abnormal or something like that. They might be dysfunctional in certain ways. But there are other people who are dysfunctional, but they're great artists or great poets or great musos or people like myself. My compassion has been shaped by the tragedies that I've experienced in my life. I'm not saying that I'm an easy person to live with, but I'm also one who's focused upon what I consider are good values, and that is that women should not be treated in the way my mother was treated. Domestic violence, I abhor it, and made it very clear. So those experiences that I've had left their mark on my life. The tragedy for me is I've witnessed what it did to my brothers, and I've lost two of my brothers, but one of them severely affected by childhood abuse, and so I watched him and his demise, and that was extremely sad for me. But how did I survive? Well, I turned it around into a positive, in as much that I think that I'm a more compassionate human being. I made a better police chaplain because of it. I was a police chaplain at one stage. I was a better minister because of it. And it just gave me a heightened awareness of the sadness of life. I don't have to watch movies to be to see those sorts of things. I've lived it. My life's been a living movie.
So in a way, you turned it into a positive and used it as another tool in your toolbox.
Well, yes, but it might have been just that my personality. But I also need to emphasise I met some wonderful people in my life, wonderful people. So I was aware that there was an alternative. Okay, and I think that's half the problem. Is if you're in that experience that I've gone through, as many have been, but also to be aware that there was an alternative and also to be conscious of that. So just as ugly as and the horrible things that I experienced, I've also experienced the beautiful and so on, and valued those in equal strength, if I could put it. So the negative was balanced by such wonderful positives, which I, for some reason or other, probably had the skill to recognise. That's the difference.
Gordon, it's been epic. I mean, that's actually, I feel like that's almost a beautiful way to end, man.
Okay, cool.
Unless you want to keep going, I could keep going, but I've got a feeling you're a busier man than I.
Yes, well, I've got to do mayor things at some stage.
Yeah. Like, that title, mayor? Do you feel like sometimes the title of Lord Mayor can make you unapproachable to the general public?
Well, put it like this: it doesn't seem to hold many people back in the city because they know me from my days as being a minister.
Yeah, oh, that's cool. Yeah, oh, cool, man. All right. Well, listen, it's been amazing, and I ask all guests to come to the podcast with a cause. So, what cause would you like to advocate for today?
Well, in my previous life as a United Church minister in this city, I was chair of the board of Lifeline for the South Coast.
Amazing.
And so I would just ask if there's any chance that you would like to direct some energies and resources towards a good cause in Australia and internationally as towards telephone counselling services. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning that. For those that don't know yet, it's telephone counselling services for people in crisis?
Crisis, yeah.
Okay.
And in Australia, Lifeline is mainly run through, it does have some paid staff, but there's a big team of volunteers who keep it going, yeah.
Amazing. So I'll put a link to Lifeline and its various forms around Australia, and you can find that link in Gordon's show notes, which you can then find on the terriblehappytalks.com website. And you can choose the platform you prefer to listen to your podcasts on, such as Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, and I've just been picked up by iHeartRadio, which I'm really stoked about. And yeah, choose your platform. Big shout out to Indosol who support the show, and if you use promo code THT, you will get a 15% discount on a pair of flip-flops or slides, and they will be providing much food to the Balinese community. So yeah, get on and buy some shoes and show some support. Gordon, now listen, I've got a gift for you. Now, one of the gifts I usually give guests is a pair of Indosol flip-flops, but we had a discussion about this, and you're actually not allowed to receive gifts, okay? It's unprofessional, and I totally respect that. I'm definitely not trying to bribe you with this present, but all guests that come on the show get I feel kind of shy giving this to you because don't laugh. It's a Terrible Happy Talk circle logo sticker. Only guests that have been on the show get one of these, so you're an alumni of the show now.
Thank you.
And you can stick it wherever you want. Maybe get your PA to stick it on your laptop. Come on, Gordon, you can do it. And I just want to say a profound thank you for your time and your honesty and vulnerability. It's admirable, and I believe that vulnerability is strength.
Thank you.
And I love to hear some of your leadership perspectives, and I hope you're applying them in all that you do.
Yes, well, it's not so much that it's theory, but it's come out of a lot of practice and a lot of failures and a lot of challenging moments. Anyway, all the best.
All right, let's go.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Bye.